Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you guys coming. We're in the Sefer Ben La'ashri. We're up to Parshat Behaalotecha. Behaalotecha is a unique parsha, probably one or two parshas in the Torah where there's a lot of different things happening. Right? Most parshas, there's one or two storylines. They're generally interconnected, or one leads to another. But here, there's completely different topics and limudim that are happening. Befrat, one of the most interesting and very hard to understand parsha, where Miriam and Aaron seem to speak Lashon Hara on Moshe Rabbenu, and older Mefarshim, Befrat, as we're going to learn today in the Ben La'ashri, have a very difficult time understanding what exactly happened. And the Ben La'ashri, Kedarkei Bakodesh, delves into this in a unique way, where he's mechalish to us tremendous chidushim, tremendous ideas that, at least to me, I never even thought about how to approach it, and helps us understand what really happened, what was the story behind the story. So as we begin every shir in the Ben La'ashri, our learning should be Lulei Nishmas, the Tzaddik, Rabbi Yitzchak HaKohen ben Osher Anshel Hoberman, the Tzaddik Miranana, who unfortunately had no children, to perpetuate his legacy, to learn, to continue his teachings, and we, Baruch Hashem, have the gewaldige schus, the unique schus, to learn from him and from his sefer Befrat. It's great chidushim, and we know that tzaddikim are makir toiv and gedol tzaddikim b'misasan yoisem ibechayein, and we hope and we daven that the Ben La'ashri should be me'eretz yosher for us, ishke yeshuasai, whatever the person needs. So we're going to begin with the piece V'atidavim Miriam v'Aaron b'Moshe. So the first paragraph we're going to learn outside. The pasuk says that Miriam and Aaron spoke Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu regarding the fact that he separated from his Isha HaKushas. Now, kasha number one, in this specific Indian, doesn't directly address it, we're going to learn it later on, is that Sipora, who is obviously the Isha HaKushas, didn't come from the land of Kush, right? Isha HaKushas means the lady from Kush. She came from Midian. So why was she called Kushas? We know Rashi has a pshat. We have to understand at least Pashup pshat, what does it mean? In addition, the Torah says right after the fact that Miriam and Aaron spoke Lashon Hara, that Moshe was a great Anav. Anav Mikol Adam. Says the Ben La'ashri, it's very nice, and it's true, but this is not the place to say it. The place to tell us that Moshe Rabbeinu was a great Anav was when Hashem wanted to appoint him to lead Klal Yisrael and to go to Parai, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, I'm not worthy. The Torah should have said, yeah, he said he's not worthy because he was a great Anav. Over here is not really the place for it. Then comes the Bamba Shaila, the main kasha over here, was how could it be that Miriam the Tzaddikus, the Miriam who was the Nevuah, one of the great Nevi'im in Klal Yisrael, she was so great that even before Moshe Rabbeinu was born, she already prophesied that her parents would have a child, Moshe Rabbeinu, who would lead Klal Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. That was one of the things that she convinced her father to remarry Yocheved, her mother. We know that Amram divorced his wife when Pari made Gzeira on the Banim. And one of the many arguments that Miriam had to get back to her was that you're preventing Moshe Rabbeinu from being born. Moreover, she saw with her own eyes the nisan that Hashem did through Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, as being the shliach of Hashem in Mitzrayim, the Makkos, the Yamsuf, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu got the Torah, he went up to Shemayim. Could you say such a thing? I mean, imagine saying Chas v'Shalom Lashon Hara about one of the great Tzaddikei Adors, the legends, right? I don't want to say any names, but Chas v'Shalom, could we say Lashon Hara and the great Tzaddikim of Klal Yisrael throughout the generations? How could it be that she would say Lashon Hara? Moreover, how come Aaron didn't protest and tell Miriam, why are we speaking Lashon Hara? You want to say it's our brother, he doesn't really care. A brother, non-brother, Lashon Hara is usher if you speak about your friend, if you speak about your relative, you speak about someone you know doesn't care. If you're roasting somebody and he's happy that you're roasting him, there's no such thing. Lashon Hara, even if it's true, right? Lashon Hara, we all should realize Lashon Hara is when you say something that everybody knows. That's Lashon Hara. If it's not true, it's Matzi Shemra, which is even worse. So just because it's the truth that this individual is X, Y, and Z, it's still Lashon Hara. So how could it be that Aaron HaKohen didn't say anything? In addition, there's a famous Gemara that says that there are three things that Hashem agreed with Moshe Rabbeinu. One of them was the fact that he separated from his wife. What was Moshe Rabbeinu's cheshbon? Moshe Rabbeinu's cheshbon was that before Klal Yisrael went to Matan Torah, Hashem told them to separate from their wives for 3 days. Why 3 days? Because it takes the zera that's in the Isha from living with her husband 3 days to spoil, right? Which means that up to 3 days, the zera can still enter the ovaries of the Isha and produce a child, right? So there's chiyas, there's life in that zera, which is tameh, and after that it disappears, it dissipates, right? So he said if there was a one-time event that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu to tell Klal Yisrael to separate from your wives for 3 days, so me, said Moshe Rabbeinu, that I speak to Kadosh Baruch Hu at any moment Hashem can talk to me, or at any moment I have to talk to Hashem, I have to be constantly separated from my wife, right? Just as a side note, in general, how did a Navi know, or a Naviya know, when Hashem wanted to talk to them? Right? How do they know? Right? They have to be Kaddish, they have to be Tahar. The answer is that before the Shechina, before the HaKadosh Baruch Hu would come on to the Navi to send a message, the Shechina would rest on the individual, their body would start to shake. That was a siman that the Shechina is approaching, the Neshama would feel it, and that was the sign to go into the mikveh, to be prepared that Hashem would speak to them and bring them a Navi. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have this luxury because at any moment Hashem would give him a message, and any moment it had to be that Moshe Rabbeinu would have to be ready to speak to Hashem, so he constantly had to be in a state of tahara. So, therefore, he made a kal v'chomer. Ma'adach Klal Yisrael that only went to HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to get the Torah had to be tar. So me who am constantly speaking to Hashem, constantly learning from Hashem, all the more so. So the kasha is, so Moshe Rabbeinu made a kal v'chomer. A kal v'chomer is the oraisa. Number one, why do you need a kal v'chomer? Number two, how could Miriam have said that Moshe Rabbeinu separated from his wife on his own? It's not true on his own. He made a kal v'chomer and Hashem was masking. So in order to understand these kashas, just we'll quickly summarize. Number one, why does it say that Moshe Rabbeinu was an onav? Number two, how could it be that Miriam spoke Lashon Hara? Number three, how come Aaron didn't protest? And number four, how come Miriam said that Moshe on his own das decided to separate from his wife? It's not true. He made a kal v'chomer, and Hashem was masking, says the Gemara in Brachos. So the Ben Ashri is going to focus first on this idea of the kal v'chomer. He's going to bring another Indian regarding Yosef Atzadik, which we're going to learn. And through that, he's going to circle back to answer all the questions that we have. And we're going to learn some tremendous chidushim. We're going to start inside V'yesh Liyashev, and we're going to build it piece by piece. It's not complicated. It's just a little bit of an arichas. V'yesh Liyashev kushas ataisis. U'emeli yivur kol ha'inyan. D'isa v'chazal. Mem shana shahoy b'midbar. There's a famous medrash that the 40 years that Klal Yisrael was in the midbar, Aroina shal Yosef mahalachim ma'aron shal Behaalotecha. The Aron of Yosef was walking in front of Klal Yisrael together, which means, I would imagine, side by side, in the Aron where the Luchos were, Lefnei Machan Yisrael. V'nitzoytze eish yoytze mibez Aronis, and sparks of fire came out of Kedusha, came out from these Aronis, the Sarfin kol ha'koitzim v'nachoshin v'akravim. They would burn all the thorns, the snakes, the scorpions, right? Al pipashib shat, the physical thorns, snakes and scorpions. Api Kabbalah, we know that these are dvarim shebetumah, serious tumah, and they would destroy them. And the smoke would rise up, umariach mikol mine besamim, and it would have tremendous, pleasurable smells, things that were reach toiv, and would help the people as they walk through the midbar. Shenamra mis oisolim in a midbar. What's coming up from the midbar? Mukuteres mar ulavoina, that has the reach of keteres of mar ulavoina. This is in Shir Hashirim. Paragimel Pasuk Vav. Amr Chazal. The Umas Olam Shalom Mi El Haronis. The Umas Olam would say, who are these Aronis? These tremendous things that are happening here. What are in these coffins that sparks of fire of Kedusha are coming out? V'Amr Lahem Yisrael. Klal Yisrael would tell them, right? Just as a parenthetically, the Umas Olam would come into the midbar to trade with Klal Yisrael. So they had a shaykhis with them. Now is not the time to get into it, but there was a connection. It wasn't that Klal Yisrael was completely alone in the midbar. Whenever they came to a yishuv or close to a yishuv, the people would come close to them and trade with them. And they would ask them these different questions. Who are in these coffins? Klal Yisrael told them, Echad shel Shechina, v'Echad shel Meis. How could it be? Now here it seems to be that maybe they were together in the same coffin. It's probably not. But the question is, how could it be that the Aron of a dead person, a mace, to go together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu that's chai forever. It doesn't go together. A dead person doesn't go with a live person or a live being. Amr lahem, no, you're making a mistake. On the contrary, this is a covet to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that Yosef at Tzaddik is next to it. Yosef was Mekayim, whatever it says in the Torah. This Maila, that the sparks of fire came out of the Aron, Nikra Lahava, is called Lahava. It's a certain type of name. Kediksiv, like the famous pasuk that says Beis Yosef Lahava. Right? It says Beis Yaakov La'esh, Beis Yosef Lahava. Lahava is a special type of fire, has a special koyach. That comes from Yosef HaTzadik, and that's what came out of this Aron, this coffin. Nearly Shezacha Lezeh. The reason that Yosef HaTzadik was Zoicha to this special Kedusha, this special power, because he was able to withstand the nisayon of Arayis. Rav Amram Chasida Shetzak, the Rav Amram Chasida, the famous Rav Amram that the Gemara brings down, that was in an nisayon, and he screamed out, "There's a great fire in the house of Amram," right? And people came, and that prevented him from doing an avera. Why? Because Arayis is a fire within a person. It's one of the Gemara says that one of the most difficult things for a person to overcome is the taiva of Arayis, and by overcoming it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a reward. The taiva is meruba, and he got this tremendous skula that fire came out of his Aron HaKadosh, of his Aron. V'hina Isa. So now, with that introduction, that the Aron of Yosef walked alongside the Aron, or traveled alongside the Aron, as Klal Yisrael made its way through the Midbar and destroying everything in its path. V'hina Isa. Amal hanmina l'rabavo. Elokechem kohenum. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a kohen. Ki kaver l'Moshe b'ametava. Now we're going to come into a completely, what seems to be an unrelated topic, and the Ben Asher is going to tie it to our Chiddush. B'ametava. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu buried Moshe Rabbeinu, a mace has tama. What did Hashem toivel? Haksiv mi madad b'sh'al u'mayim amaloi be'esh. So Rabbi told me toivel himself in fire. So v'hinei tzarach lahavin. What's going on over here? The im hamin hemin she'yesh l'mayim shu nivra lias gadol me'abayra. And the Ben Lashi has a very pasha de shaila. If the goy, the min, the apikaris understood that mayim is a physical thing, which is a shaila if it is or not, right? This is not really the shir for it, but really we have to discuss how does a mikvah matar a person. How could a mikvah take a goy and turn him into a yid? That's an unbelievable thing. How could a mikvah that's if take a isha that if you live with her you're chayiv karos, and now when she goes into the mikvah and they live as husband and wife, it's a big mitzvah, right? There's a tremendous koyach in the mikvah. But this min seem to understand that water is a physical thing, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu kaviyachol, whatever that means, can't be toivel in the mikvah because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is toivel, right? V'al kein iesha sheyitvel behem. So how did it help him by telling him he toiveled in fire? Doesn't make sense. Gam eishrak nivra. Now, fire is also a nivra. Now, again, it's very. We have to be clear. Obviously, Rabbi didn't mean to say that Kosh Baruch Hu Kavyochel is toivel in fire, and not the Chas Shalom that there was a having that he's toivel in mayim. This was the conversation that he had, and it could be the Rabbi just brushed him off. We're going to see in a second, right, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wasn't even a shiloh to start with, but he didn't want to answer him because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, obviously, as we're going to see, did not become tamei from burying Moshe Rabbeinu, and see why. Fire can never be mekabel tuma, which means to say, I guess, that if you take a nevela, right, which is tamei, or you take something that's tamei and you throw it into fire, the fire itself doesn't become tamei, which means if then you would, let's say, roast an animal, right, in order to eat it, you would have no problem. Haloi, right? Kivrei tzadikim. Now we also know that kivrei tzadikim ain't metamim. There's a famous discussion in Bav Metzia if kivrei tzadikim are metamim or not. We do the tzadik nikra ha'oimit b'nisoyin v'shoyim abris. Now a tzadik himself is, like we explained before, is someone who's oimit in the sionis, and more importantly shoyim abris. And he's shoyim abris even though there's a fire in him. There's a spiritual fire in him of taiva. Right? There's a taiva that burns in him. He overcomes it. He now becomes fire. Now, with these two Hagdamas we can understand. Hagdama number one, that Yosef Tzaddik had the schus because he overcame the tremendous nisyonos, right, with Eshes Potifar. He got the schus that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, through him, sent out sparks of Kedusha to burn any problem that laid in front of Klal Yisrael in the Midbar. And number two, we understand that a tzaddik in general, even when he dies, there's no tumah, because a tzaddik is oimid bin nisyon, is shoyim bris, is a shtik fire. Fire has no tumah, so too the tzaddik doesn't have tumah. Okay, we're not going to get into the sugya now. Can a kohen go to a kiver tzaddik or not? Not so Parshat. We'll leave that aside for the moment. Lefizer. Now let's explain our case. Lebir haksubim. Let's use these two hakdamas of Yosef Tzaddik and the fact that the fire does not get tamei to explain the following psukim. Right? Al oides isha kushes. Pirush Rashi. When Miriam spoke about the isha kushes, Rashi explains hakavana al tzipora. V'ikshar Rashbam. Hari tzipora, like we said in the beginning, Midyanis, Mivnei Keturah. She came from Midian. Shehem Mishem. V'kush ba micham. Right? Tzipora came from the same family as Shem, the same family as Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? They all came from Shem, which is a very important yisoid. The Kush ba Micham. Kush came from Cham. It's two completely different countries, two completely children of Noach. I came Pirush. V'chein kasser Rabbeinu balik. Tais al piyam avor b'divrei yom l'Moshe. Rabbeinu Moshe Rabbeinu olav Shalom. Shemoshe hayi melech b'Kush mem shana. There's a famous medrash that many people don't know, that Moshe Rabbeinu left Mitzrayim when he was 40. He came back when he was 80. Right? So what happened in the 40 years? The answer is that for a period of time, he was the king in Kush. Minig ha-Medina. Now here's an important thing to remember. The minig in the Medina in Kush was shemelech chodash huchrach lises almanis melech hakodim. That the new king would have to marry the widow of the old king. Ach kol ha-memshana lo nagaba. So what happened was Moshe Rabbeinu, whatever the reason is, how he became the king, the famous story that they were attacking another country and they were surrounded by snakes. His army couldn't get into it. He sent the storks to eat the snakes. He became the king. And there's a reason that Hashem did it, is because Hashem wanted Moshe Rabbeinu to learn how to become a melech, because Hashem knew that he was going to be the king for the next 40 years of Klal Yisrael. And being that was his new title, he had to marry the widow of the old king. And he married her. But he didn't touch her, says the Medrash. Loi naga ba, the whole 40 years. Nimsa, so it comes out, Moshe Rabbeinu Shalom Adam bin Nisayin, they arise, od Yosef Yosef. That Moshe Rabbeinu withstood the temptation of arise much more than Yosef. Because Yosef, on the one hand, it was a little easier for him to get out of it because Potiphar was an Eshes Ish. Here, Moshe Rabbeinu technically was married to this lady. And in some sense, it was mutter to him. And it was 40 years. The Sham Eshes Ish, the Kan Penuya, Vaitzman Rab Hemshana, 40 years that a person can live with somebody and not touch her. Because of that, he overcame this tremendous temptation. He was shoyme his bris on a level unbeknownst to anybody. For sure, Moshe Rabbeinu turned his body into fire. So the Ben Lashi teaches an important thing, a tremendous chiddush, that because Moshe Rabbeinu was oimid bin Nisayin for 40 years, not to live with this lady, not to be metamehim, not only the fact that he wouldn't nurse from the Mitzrayim, he turned his body into fire. Valkein, and because of that, it's not a chiddush now that Moshe Rabbeinu was able to go up to Shemayim, because he became non-physical, he became a fire. And to go into the fire, of course, he himself was fire. Zehush Amr Miriam, the Kavachayim de Moshe. Now comes an unbelievable chiddush. Miriam said, I don't understand something. Right? Listen to this unbelievable chiddush. It was worth it for you to come today to listen to this chiddush. Miriam said, I don't understand something. Moshe Rabbeinu is not just a regular tzaddik. He's a fire tzaddik. Right? So the Kal V'chomer that he made, just like Klal Yisrael separated from their wives 3 days before the Torah, so too I have to separate from my wife. Miriam said, you don't have to separate from your wife. You're fire. You can't become Tameh, even if you live with your wife. We just learned that a tzaddik doesn't become Tameh because he's fire. Who's a greater epitome of a tzaddik that's fire than Moshe Rabbeinu, who overcame his tremendous arayas? So Miriam said, the Kavachomi that Moshe Rabbeinu made, I can slug up. And therefore, the only reason that he separated from his wife was on his own. So it's not a stira. The Shani Yisrael, Shein Lehem Adregas Eish, Huchuchu Lefroish. Klal Yisrael was not in the level of fire, they had to separate. Ava Moshe, the Lokach Isha Kushis, Vamas Minisayin Canal. The Isha Kushis that the Pasuk is telling us is not Tzipora. He married an Isha Kushis. So Miriam says, I'm talking about the Isha Kushis that Moshe Rabbeinu married the 40 years he was the king. And he did not live with her. And because of that, Moshe Rabbeinu became a shtik fire. If he became a shtik fire, he no longer becomes tameh. So why can't he live with his wife? Even if he lives with his wife, he's not tameh. So we learn from here tremendous chiddush. Let's summarize. Number one, Moshe Rabbeinu became fire. How did he become fire? Because of the Isha Kushis that he married. Not referring to Tzipora, referring to the almana of the king of Kush that Moshe Rabbeinu had to marry. And Miriam said he didn't do anything wrong with her. He didn't live with her. So he became fire. If he became fire, he can no longer become Tameh. And if he no longer become Tameh, so he can't compare himself to Klal Yisrael. And the Rabbi is allowed to live with his wife, because even if he lives with his wife, he's not Tameh. Right? We know that this is that a person that lives with his wife becomes Tameh, he has to go to the mikvah, Tilas Ezra, right? The Torah Tila doesn't have it, right? All the tzaddikim say you still have to go to the mikvah, right? Sugi in itself. But Lamaisa, we see from here that Miriam did not speak Lashon Hara by Moshe Rabbeinu. He wasn't saying, why did Moshe Rabbeinu separate from Tzipora? He said, why? Because she's an Isha Kushis. He said, Moshe Rabbeinu, who separated from the Isha Kushis, and therefore he became a shtik fire, he can't become Tameh. So why isn't he living with his wife? He can't compare himself. And they both said, this is not Lashon Hara. They had a machlokes in how to learn the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu said it was a Kavachomer. They told Moshe Rabbeinu, we can slug up your Kavachomer. And they went back and forth. The Chushash, and you know why? The pasuk says that he was an Anav. The Choshash, because Moshe Rabbeinu was nervous. Ulai nafal mimadrigois eskulius. Moshe Rabbeinu was concerned. Yeah, at one point maybe I was this individual, but I don't know what happened since then. It could be that I did an avera and I'm no longer a fire, and therefore I'm like a regular person in Klal Yisrael, and therefore I have to be careful. Umemela miyushav kushis hatoy says the luli anavas Moshe Rabbeinu. The whole reason that Moshe Rabbeinu thought he can make a kavachomer was not because in principle he argued with Miriam that a tzaddik is a piece of fire, is a shtik fire, can become tameh. He said that maybe I'm not on that level, and I can't assume that I'm on the level of fire. And therefore, the Vadek Hameh Kadosh Baruch Hu Gialish Oidenu Madrei Gedolah. That's why Kadosh Baruch Hu told Miriam, no, it's not true. It is for your level Lashon Hara, because you should know. And Kadosh Baruch Hu told Miriam, you should know that in all the galaxies that I created, in all the malachim and super angels and archangels and mega angels and tremendous angels, Seraphim, Chayis, Yefanim, there's no one like Moshe Rabbeinu. The whole Beisi Namanhu. There's no one like Moshe Rabbeinu, and you're going to speak Lashon Hara. Now, how? Because of that, right? And you can't be mafrich the Kavachomer. B'zeh Yuvan Gam Ken Sima Pasav Yitzek Moshe Kelna Rafon Allah. V'yesh Ledaktek Lama Lahiskil Miriam. Why don't he say Kadosh Baruch Hu please merapa Miriam? U'mazeh she'eshivu Hashem. Why did Hashem answer that Miriam has to be in containment for 7 days? Right? What's the case? If a lady spit at her father, if a daughter spit at her father, for sure she would have to be locked up for 7 days. All the more so, she spat at HaKadosh Baruch Hu or spat at Moshe Rabbeinu, she get more. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu use a Kal V'chomer? Because we learn from here a tremendous yesod that the Kal V'chomer is one of the Yud Gimel Midas, right? We know that there's 13 ways to dash in the Torah. Keneged Zeh, there's 13 midos, right? One of the midos, right, is Yud Gimel Midas, is Kel, right? And the Kal V'chomer is opposite that. And when a person does a Kal V'chomer that's good, that's solid, that's Torah, that has the ability to bring refuah to an individual, right? We know that the Torah is the world, and a person who can slug up a kavachomer, a person who can create a kavachomer, brings refuah to someone, and when you slug up a kavachomer, you actually make it worse. And therefore, a person, Moshe Rabbenu, was afraid that because Miriam slugged up the kavachomer, as we learned, it brought her problems. Hashem said, no, Hashem learned a new kavachomer. So we see from here a tremendous chidushim, that when the Torah says that Miriam spoke about Isha HaKushis, it's not talking about Tzipora, because it doesn't make sense. Tzipora came from Midian. She came from Shem. Kushis came from Kush, who came from Chum. Rather, she was referring to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu had to marry the widow of the king of Kush because he became the new king. And even though he married her, and on a certain level he was technically allowed to be with her, Moshe Rabbeinu said, no, I can't touch her. I can't defile myself through her because I'm going to speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And through that, Oymid HaNisayin, he became a shtick fire. And if he became a shtick fire, said Miriam, then he doesn't become Tameh. And therefore, he can't make a kavachomer from the rest of Klal Yisrael. And Memela, there was no reason for him to leave his wife. So why did he leave his wife? On his own accord. And Hashem said, no, it's not true. Moshe Rabbeinu, right, did make a kavachomer because he, on his own level, thought that he may have gone down from that great level of being a piece of fire, a shtick fire, and therefore he was allowed to make a kavachomer. And by slugging up the kavachomer, Miriam actually brought a little bit of a pegima on herself. So Hashem had to make a new kavachomer that could not be slugged up to bring the refuah on Miriam Hatzadekah. So Miriam really did not think that she was speaking Lashon Hara. Miriam thought that there was a Taridic argument. Moshe Rabbeinu thought he had a kavachomer. Miriam said, I can slug up your kavachomer. And the only reason that she was able to slug up the kavachomer was because she didn't understand that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't do it on his own. He thought that he really went down on the level. And Hashem told Miriam and Aaron that she did not. And from there we have a tremendous new chidushim, new yisoid in the story of Miriam and Aaron.